You ever buy yourself a piece of peace, really drop everything, spend half your savings, and settle somewhere you thought would finally let you breathe, only to have the entire neighborhood declare we're the moment you unpack a box? I did. I never thought peace would cost me this much, not in a million years. Let me set the scene for you. Crystal Lake, 15 acres of glassy water and tall pines, with a house just far enough off the beaten path to make you forget about traffic or nosy neighbors. Or so I thought, anyway. Turns out, the first neighbor I met was standing on my shoreline, all 5 feet 3 inches of her, platinum hair sprayed stiff as a helmet, yelling at me like I'd just broken into Fort Knox. "This is community property," she hollered, voice sharp enough to wake the loons on the lake. Dorothy Chambers, president of the Willowbrook Estates, HOA, 58, going on dictator, with 5 board members flanking her like Secret Service. I barely had time to sip my coffee before she started threatening legal action on my own dock, mind you. She had no idea I'd spent 30 years as a real estate attorney. She just saw an outsider, a new mark. Now, if you've ever dealt with an HOA queen bee, you know, these folks act like they wrote the law, even when they've barely read it. Dorothy started barking about established usage rights and prescriptive easements, rattling off legal terms like she'd swallowed Black's Law Dictionary. Board members nodded along, one guy with wire-rimmed glasses actually shaking as he told me, "We have documentation." I almost laughed. Prescriptive easement? Please. That only applies if the owner allows it, which none of the previous owners had officially done. I try to keep my cool, because if there's one thing I learned from decades in court, it's that the first person to lose their temper loses the case. "Look, Mrs. Chambers," I said, "I've got the deed inside if you want to see it. This isn't community property. Never has been. Lot 47, Section B, is outside your HOA lines. Always was." She didn't want to hear it. Started yelling about children swimming, elderly folks fishing, 20 years of tradition. One of her minions was recording me on her phone. Fine by me. If you're going to threaten legal action, better get it on tape. I figured, all right, time to set some boundaries. Literally, you have 60 seconds to get off my property, or I'm calling the sheriff. Dorothy just smirked, told me her cousin was a sheriff. But I called anyway. Put the dispatcher on speaker. "We'll send a unit right away, Mr. Brooks," the dispatcher said, loud and clear for everyone to hear. That was when Dorothy's little army started to wilt, backing away, eyes glued to their phones. She wasn't done, though. Not by a long shot. As she squeezed through the gate, now locked with a heavy-duty padlock, installed by yours truly, she hissed, "You've made a powerful enemy today. I destroyed bigger fish than you." All I could do was watch their convoy of white Range Rovers disappear down the road and wonder just how deep her claws went into this place. The uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. Later, I noticed the private property signs I'd put up were gone, tire tracks in the grass where they shouldn't be. This wasn't just a neighbor being nosy. Dorothy was already playing dirty, and retirement was starting to look a whole lot like my old job. Next morning, there's a certified letter at my door. Postal worker looks like he's expecting Dorothy to jump out of the bushes. The letter is a masterpiece of HOA legalese. $10,000 in fines for hostile environment, unauthorized modifications, you name it. And they threatened to lien on my property if I didn't pay in 30 days. Rookie move. I drafted 100 letters just like it, but these claims wouldn't hold up for 5 minutes in front of judge. So I started digging. Pulled the original 1995 HOA founding documents. Checked the survey. Clear as day, my land, my lake, zero obligation to the HOA. But here's the kicker. They've been collecting $50 a month from every family, supposedly for lake maintenance, for 20 years. That's $1.5 million. Where the hell did all that money go? That's when Judge Harold Whitman showed up. Old-timer, sharp as a tack. "You're not the first," he said, settling onto my porch. Turns out, Dorothy had run off the last 2 owners, sold under market. Then the houses just sat empty. Development projects, she claimed, but nothing ever got built. Sounded fishy, so I headed down to the county clerk's office. Janet, the clerk, helped me dig up transfer records. 7 properties, all sold cheap, all snapped up by LLCs tied back to, you guessed it, Chambers Development, Dorothy's own shell company. It all clicked. Dorothy's game was intimidation, pressure, and acquisition. Use the HOA to run folks off, buy their land through shell companies, collect fake fees, assemble enough parcels for a resort. My property was the last piece. If she could break me, she'd get her payday. Only problem? I wasn't going anywhere. I drafted a response to the HOA's letter, a precise, point-by-point rebuttal, citing every relevant law, and closed by warning that any more fraud would force me to expose 20 years of their so-called lake maintenance. Hand-delivered it to the HOA office, made sure Dorothy saw me do it. She read it through the window, smug to shocked to livid, just like that. She called before I even got back to my truck. "You're making a mistake, Brooks. Walk away, or you'll regret it." I told her. "Where's the $1.5 million, Dorothy?" She hung up. That's when I knew I'd struck a nerve. 3 nights later, the emergency HOA meeting packed 200 people into the community center. Dorothy stood at the podium, painting me as the villain, trying to steal the community's lake. But then an elderly lady, I'd never seen her before, stood up and asked, "Dorothy, I've paid $9,000 in lake fees over 15 years. Can you show us how it was spent?" The room shifted. Dorothy dodged. Then I asked to speak, quoted their own bylaws, and took the floor. I showed the original survey, the deed, the chain of title, all on the overhead projector. "You've been paying for a lake the HOA never owned," I told them. $1.5 million unaccounted for. The mood in the room turned. Folks started asking where their money went. Dorothy lost control, let slip that she had plans for a resort. Someone shouted, "What resort?" Phones came out. People Googled her shell companies. The board's own treasurer called for a forensic audit. The vote was overwhelming. That audit was the domino that brought everything crashing down. Suddenly, I was the neighborhood's unofficial detective. People started dropping by with their own horror stories. Sarah Mitchell, a soft-spoken librarian, told me how her parents lost their house. Fines for the color of their fence, unapproved dock repairs, $10,000 in bogus penalties until they sold for half what it was worth. It was the same pattern over and over. Dorothy and her clique targeted the elderly and anyone on a fixed income, hounded them with fines, then snapped up their land. Sheriff Davidson, Dorothy's cousin, ended up switching sides once he saw the scope of the mess. 23 forged signatures, $3.2 million in undermarket property transfers, and a trail of money straight to Dorothy's accounts. The forensic accountant I hired, Catherine Foster, tough as nails, found a real kicker. 60% of every lake maintenance fee went straight into Dorothy's vendor services, all tied to her shell companies. RICO-level stuff. Dorothy panicked. She blocked my driveway with a dumpster, sent private security to sit outside my property line, started an online smear campaign calling me a crook, even doctored up fake arrest records. Her own board turned on her. One by one, people flipped, brought me flash drives, emails, copies of everything she tried to destroy. I compiled a 170-page report for the Attorney General and called in the feds. The pressure finally cracked her. Her own accountant, William Foster, showed up with boxes of secret books and proof of tax fraud. Now we're talking federal charges, not just HOA slap fights. At the next public meeting, with the audit findings projected on the wall, $2.7 million stolen, 12 shell companies, offshore accounts. Dorothy snapped, started screaming, tried to shut it all down. The board removed her on the spot. Unanimous vote. The arrest came at dawn. I watched from my window as the feds led her out in handcuffs, hair a mess, suit wrinkled, her empire of intimidation and fraud reduced to nothing. Turns out, Dorothy wasn't just a small-time crook. She'd done this in other states, always fleeing before the law caught up. This time, though, she'd picked a fight with the wrong retiree. Her trial was a media circus. The evidence was airtight: emails, recordings, audits, testimonies from the people she'd bullied. She tried to play the victim, claimed she was just an aggressive businesswoman, but her own words, her own confession, caught on tape, sealed her fate. Guilty on all charges, racketeering, wire fraud, tax evasion. 10 years in federal prison. $3.5 million in restitution. I got my $9,000 in returned fees, but I donated it to start a legal defense fund for any resident facing HOA abuse. The community came together, set up a trust to keep Crystal Lake accessible for everyone. No more secrets, no more intimidation. The families who lost their homes got first dibs on buying them back, and many did. Mrs. Mitchell's mom moved back in her lakeside cottage, put flowers by her husband's old fishing spot. That old iron gate, the one Dorothy rattled on her first visit, we restored it, hung a plaque. This gate once divided us. Now it unites us against corruption. News of the case spread. Other HOAs got audited, more crime rings busted, and I was invited to speak at the first ever FBI task force on HOA fraud. Wild, right? All because one stubborn lawyer wouldn't sell out. I stand on my dock most evenings now, cup of coffee in hand, watching the lake change colors as the sun goes down. Neighbors stop by, some with casseroles, some just to talk. Crystal Lake finally feels like the piece I bought in the first place. But more than that, it feels like we built something real together, a community that fights back, that stands up for each other. So, let me leave you with this. If you've ever stared down an HOA bully or watched someone get railroaded by fake fines and threats, tell your story. Drop it in the comments. If enough of us stand together, there's not a crook in the country who can stop us. Remember, it's not just law that beats corruption. It's courage and a community that refuses to back down. What would you have done if Dorothy Chambers set her sights on you? Would you have stood your ground or let her steal your lake too? Let's hear it.